talks about all of you out there who know you might be trapped in a box. As my career plateaued, am I going as high up the ladder as I possibly can go? Do I want to start my own business, but I'm afraid of failing? Or how many of you are working at a job where there's not going to be a pay raise? Everybody talks about they haven't had a pay raise in 10 years or something like that. And you're still hanging in there. So today we're going to be talking about what causes that, what causes a person to actually stay in a somewhat financially abusive situation or a management abusive situation. And as you know, with the Rich Dad and the Rich Dad radio show, we're always talking really about financial education. And financial education is almost opposite to academic education. Like when I was in high school, I was a straight C student until I started getting Fs. But I somehow graduated, went to a great school and completed. But the point here is I don't know where I'd be today if I had listened to my poor dad. And my poor dad was the head of education for the state of Hawaii, very smart guy, good guy, PhD, which stands for poor, helpless, desperate, And he was always going to school. He always believed, he went on to Stanford, Northwestern, University of Chicago, thinking that the longer he stayed in school and he got more alphabets after his name, that was his protection. That was his box. That was his protection from the hard, cruel world. But as you know from Rich Dad, my Rich Dad was my best friend's father with no education. And he says, you don't learn anything about money at school. And all my poor dad was doing was working for money, hoping for job security and all this, protection from the harsh, cruel world, but he knew nothing about money. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a story of two different types of education, academic versus financial education. And they're completely opposite. So for those of you, once again, who are stuck in a dead-end job, not making enough money, or afraid of losing your job, wondering if you can retire or not, or not that it makes much difference to you, but what are your kids learning? The same stuff that you learned? So today is a very important show because we have a very special guest. Is a dear friend for many, many years, and one of the leading experts today on how the brain operates and why our school system's ripping us off. Any comments, Kim?
Well, this is going to be an interesting show because I think so many, we talk about this a lot, but are our schools training people to be employees, to do as you're told, follow the rules, don't make mistakes, don't ruffle feathers? And that's totally opposite of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. So I'm anxious to talk about, what the school system has done and how that's put us in these boxes. And can we break free? If you want to be that entrepreneur, if you want to start your own business, can you break free from that, having this kind of brainwashing that we've had all these years?
Or it's not even to get rich. Most people are just terrified of not having job security.
Yeah,
that's the box.
There's so much fear.
I have this college degree, that degree. I'm a little box in the middle of the world, and that's where we're at. And our kids are in the same program. Nothing has changed. So for those of you who hold that that the Department of Education is the Vatican, this is not your program, because as you may know, I have been a harsh critic of the school system. Not so much the teachers, but the teachers are complicit. If you go along with an obsolete system just to collect that paycheck and your tenure, then you're complicit, man. Let me tell you something. So that's why for those of you who hold that education is the holy grail, it's as, like the Pope and all that stuff, this is not your program. But for those of you who are open-minded enough to feel that terror in your gut, that you may have been ripped off by going to school, and your kids are getting ripped off by going to school, and your grandkids are getting ripped off by going to school, this is your program. So our special guest today is a dear friend for probably 40, 50 years now. His name is J.W. Wilson, and he's the executive director of the Advanced Learning Institute, and he's much like me. We're both in education, but our backgrounds are not in education. We just come from the point of view that something is wrong with school, and we see a different way of learning and doing and having a better life. So welcome to the program, JW.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here, Robert and Kim.
Yeah, you've been a very special guest, and you're our expert on how the brain works and, what happens to the brain when a kid sits in school. Now, first of all, are you a school teacher?
No.
What was your training in?
Criminology.
Well,
Criminology. That makes a lot of sense now. I got it.
Yeah, it's detective work, really. That's what we've been doing.
So, of course, you have your MBA and your PhD and all of this.
None of those. But we've been doing neurological and genetic research on the basis of how you learn for over 30 years.
Well, how come you don't, like we have a friend who was looking at one of my books. He says, well, where's your bibliography? He says, I won't listen to anybody unless they have a PhD after their name. So why should anybody listen to you? You don't have a PhD after your name.
Right. But did Jobs or Wozniak or Dell or Allen or Gates or
Zuckerberg
or even going back to scientists, did Darwin have a PhD? Really, what drives learning, what drives dramatic change in the world is people following what's meaningful to them.
Well, I mean,
it's not a degree.
So you're saying there's nothing meaningful in school?
Well, it's meaningful to probably about 3 to 7% of the people in the system, which have a brain plan that fits the system.
Right.
Because nobody in school ever asked me as I was growing up, what's meaningful to you? What's meaningful to you, Kim? What are you interested in, Kim? What drives you to get up in the morning, Kim? I've never had those questions asked.
Well, think about it. Everybody that's listening to this radio show right now, when they were a child, up until they went into first grade, they running around in wonder, enjoying every single minute of their life. They were running around. They were exciting. Sometimes they get in trouble by sticking their finger in a light socket, but they're beating on pots and pans. They're pulling people's pigtails. Personal meaning is driving them. Each one of us on the planet has an overabundance of neurons in one part of our brain that makes us a genius at something that nobody else has.
So what happens when a person is going to school, a child sister? You've often said that it's actually destroying the brain or something about the child.
Well, here's what happens. That genius I was just talking about, that overabundance of neurons in one part of the brain that everybody that's listening to this show has that nobody else has, they are a genius at something. So what happens is
there's hope for me?
There's a lot of hope for you, dude.
You got to find out what that genius is.
Right. Well, he's found it. That's why he has so much fun.
Yeah. But so many people that get suppressed, right?
Well, that's what happens. You get 25 watts of power through these carotid and vertebral arteries into your brain, and it goes to this gift. And every time you're satiating that gift, you live in wonder, you live in happiness, you live in joy. That's what you're doing, Robert. That's what Jobs is doing. That's what Wozniak is doing. That's what Zuckerberg is doing. And basically what they're doing is they're growing, they're learning, and when that part of your brain is activated, you naturally select in information at a rate that may be 300 to 500% faster than you would do when somebody stands in a room in front of you and tells you to memorize something.
You know, it's interesting because I just read a thing about Zuckerberg's parents and how they raised him, and they raised him to be whatever he's interested in, let him pursue it. Whatever he's passionate in, let him pursue it and support that. That's how they raised him, and that makes perfect sense.
And what the educational system does, it suppresses personal meaning.
So what happens? A person is now being trained to sit in a cubicle. Like when I left the Marine Corps finally, and I love flying. It was the best learning experience I ever had, flying for the Marine Corps. But when I came out of the Marine Corps and I entered the corporate world of Xerox, I see these people sitting in cubes.
It's painful.
And I realized that's
like
what school was training us to do, just sit in cubicles. Right. And you get pictures of your family, a couple of flowers, and you sit there for 8 hours a day. That's what they do in school too, right? Right.
Well, what happened was when you're in the educational system and this blood flow isn't going to your gift, what do you think happens to your gift when you're in there for 18 years?
I don't know.
It gets suppressed and it disappears.
It literally begins to atrophy. Those neurons don't get the nourishment. They don't get the oxygen. They don't get the glucose. They don't get the nutrients they need to grow. And literally we come out of school and say, look, you've just spent the last 30,000 hours or X number of days in school. And what do you want to do, Bobby? And Bobby goes, I don't know. And the reason for that is they haven't satiated the part of their brain that lets them to follow meaning.
But they make perfect employees.
They make perfect employees, but what's going on inside their biology? Think about it. 65% of Americans are overweight. You know what drives...
Hey, don't talk about me.
You know what drives people to be overweight?
What?
Stress. The higher your stress hormones, the lower your ability to process carbohydrates and sugars. Your body literally sucks in the fat. So what happens is, when I'm in school and I'm being rewarded or punishment, I either get an F or an A. I'm not doing what's meaningful to me. That puts stress on our biology.
Once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today we're talking about education and how it affects your adult life, but also how educational systems are affecting your child's life today, because nothing has changed. And so, again, the question is, how many of you are sitting at a job you don't like, or you're afraid of being fired from your job? The only reason you're staying there is because you're afraid of being fired, or you're not making enough money and you get resentful because you're not making enough money and the government taxes the heck out of you. And you can't afford to leave because you can't afford health insurance that the company provides for you and all that stuff. You sit there, and I think that's the kind of stress that JW talks about, because the school system is preparing you to sit in a cubicle or stand in front of a room with other people still in cubicles. And
under stress all the time.
And you're sitting there, you learn nothing, but you can fail. And during our term, JW and I, if we flunked out, we went straight to Vietnam, which wasn't a bad thing. But anyway, this whole point here that stress is there. Our kids are leaving school in student loan debt, and student loan debt today is the biggest asset for the U.S. government. Student loan debt provides more money for the federal government than any other asset class.
Yeah, and one-third of the people that owe the government that largest debt that we've got, or asset that we've got, are delinquent or behind on their payments.
I understand. And they're being riddled and they're drugged and all this stuff. Yeah. And then they have, how much did they spend on No Child Left Behind under George W?
$100 billion, and basically $100 billion over 10 years, and grades did not go up. And in many cases, they went down.
So this is where JW and I disagree. He says, I don't go after the teacher. And you're talking about the system.
Yeah,
but
system.
I do talk about the teachers if you're complicit. If you know it's not working and you go along with what's not working, just like an employee goes along with what's not working because they're afraid of losing their job, their tenure, their pension, and all that, that's the same kind of stuff we're talking about. I'm not saying they're good or bad people.
Right. And I would say they're unconsciously complicit.
Because you've been trained to do that.
That's all they know. That's the
all
only
they
system
know.
They're
trying to do their best, but they're trapped. And
So
they don't know they're trapped.
So let's say I'm a parent and I've got kids and they're in school and I'm listening to this going, oh, crap. What do I do? If my kid is now in there and being brainwashed, for lack of a better word, being forced to follow the rules and do as I say.
Go to school to get a job and work hard and save money.
Right. It's actually damaging the kid's genius and their spirit. What do I do as a parent?
Well, the first thing I would do is go look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I happy? Am I joyful?
I don't want to scare the heck out of myself. I understand. You got to look at that's what I'm saying.
But you're saying, are you happy and
right.
joy?
And do I want my child to feel the way I feel inside? So I'm going to beat him over the head to get A's. I'm going to jam him into the best school he can get, and he's going to feel just like me right now.
He went to school. I didn't really learn much. I'd be truthful. I don't use much of what I learned today. I learned to be a pilot, and I learned how to drive ships, and I haven't flown a plane in a while. I'm not driving a ship anymore. But what was I prepared for? Whereas my poor dad, a PhD, when he lost his job because he ran for lieutenant governor as a Republican in the state of Hawaii, and he lost the election because Hawaii is the Communist Republic of Hawaii, as Forbes calls it. They're so driven by labor unions. I understand. I just don't want to belong to a labor union. My dad was. But anyway, all this stuff goes on, and the question is, what is school teaching you, and is school preparing us for the real world? But more importantly, as JW says, when you look in the mirror, how prepared are you? Are you living in fear of losing your job? Are you terrified of asking for a raise because you might get fired? They can probably bring a younger person in. If you ask, today that's what's happening. Younger people are better prepared for the market than the old guys. So everything is reversed today, and yet we keep forcing kids to go to school and learn nothing. But the question is, what are you doing? So today's program is about what you can do to unlearn some of the damage that school has done for you. We're not saying drop out of school because that would be stupid. I'm just saying you've really got to protect yourself from the education system.
Well, the education system teaches kids to be very protective and be very fearful. Because we talk about being an entrepreneur. So what I was taught in school was do it by myself. To be an entrepreneur, you need to be a team player. Do it by yourself. Take the test by yourself. Don't make mistakes.
Don't help anybody.
Don't make mistakes. If you make a mistake, that's wrong. That's a failure. And also, the other thing that killed it was there's only one right answer. I mean, JW, you were talking about discovery. There's no discovery that happens. Here's the right answer. This is what you have to regurgitate. Don't look for solutions. Don't look for problems. Don't look for solutions.
Let me give an example, a real direct answer. When I love history. When I was in, sixth grade, I was asked, what year did Columbus sail to America? And everybody said 1492. And my answer was, which voyage?
Of course it was.
That was it.
But because there was 3 voyages.
Right.
And the teacher got so flustered. Still, I had a 99 correct. That was the one question. She said, that wasn't an answer. You didn't give me the right answer.
That's exactly. Well, here's what happens. What you just said, Kim and Robert, is Basically, we've got a system where the best way to get through the system is play it safe. Play it within the bounds. Play it between the A's and the C's.
So JW, he's my dear friend from rugby days and drunken brawling and womanizing and all this. And now we're happily married and drinking less and having more fun. But and we both went into the world of education. So what does the executive director of the Advanced Learning Institute, what have you done to earn that title and that position?
Well, basically, we've been working on this for about 30 years. Well, in the 1990s, it became the decade of the brain. I think that was, I forget which president came up with that idea. But what happened was then the research started to really accelerate. And what we've done is we've gone back basically and we've researched the 6,000 genes that control neurological function. And we reversed engineered how to turn on those genes. When those genes are turned on, they express proteins and enzymes that literally change the shape of your brain, and therefore that's what learning is. Learning is literally changing the shape of your brain. And when your brain shape changes, your behaviors change.
And so what's one of the first things you do to make that change?
Okay,
how do you do that?
Before I answer that question, let me go back. So what's happening to the people listening to this show who are having a hard time changing, becoming entrepreneurs, making money they want to make, is basically what they've done is their brain has been cultured by the educational system to be resistant to change.
And the corporate system where you sit there in if you make a mistake in the corporate world, you're fired.
Exactly. And intuitively, they know they're miserable, but they're afraid to leave because they're playing it safe. Listen to this. One study shows 87% of workers are disengaged. They're living for the weekend to go watch football, play soccer, drink, do whatever they do.
They're on the web during those working hours.
That's true, too. But, I mean, think about living your life.
87% of people at their jobs are miserable, basically.
Basically, that's right. And why? Because they're basically in the school system. Were we really happy? Do we remember the classes? No, we remember lunch, the girls, the sports, the guys. We remember the social. We remember all the great stuff. The classroom, the way it's designed right now, literally inhibits our ability to learn effectively.
But JW, let me just say this, okay? For all the years that you and I have been saying this for 40-something years now, every time I speak, I say, well, not my kid's school. It's like not in my backyard. And I hear more people say, well, my school is more advanced and all this stuff. Isn't that a form of denial, of fear, too?
Well, it's partially a form of denial. But here's the thing. What happens is it's kind of a local program. What your brain tends to do is you love your child. You do everything you can do to find the right school for your child. And then what you do is you create a kind of a philosophy that what I've done is right for my child. Mm-hmm. So in reality, it is a form of denial because in these environments where these kids are these good schools, the teachers really are wonderful. The administrators are wonderful. These are really good people, and that's what they're taking in, the parent is taking in. What the parent is missing is that the system that the
system is
administered is damaging their children.
System.
They don't understand this.
So if it's not,
and it damaged them too.
So if it's not school, I'm a parent. If it's not school, then what?
Well, okay. Well, it doesn't. It can still be school. It's the way we're doing it. So let me just, from a biological perspective.
I'll be very clear. JW is very, very pro-teacher. He's anti-system.
That's
and
exactly.
he's very pro-education, just not the school system.
And I'm just anti-everything.
Sometimes you are. Some days you are.
Depends on how much coffee you've had.
Where's my cup of coffee?
Right. So let me just go back. Yeah. So there's a study called the LAND study, and I may have these statistics kind of off, but he had done a creative study for NASA. And for astronauts. And what he found was he went back and studied kids that were in first grade. They were 95% creative. He redid the study for children. He then followed them until they got through high school and then into adulthood. And every year they stayed in the educational system, their creativity decreased until it went from 95% creative as 7-year-olds to 5% creative as adults. Now, let me tell you where this is a problem. We live in a freaking innovation society. Innovation is what solves everything from getting us to the moon to, curing AIDS. So what happens when you've got a population and a world that demands innovation and you've literally have bred out the ability for people to innovate? you're basically ruining your future. You end up with a Congress that doesn't work, a medical system that doesn't work, and an education system that doesn't work.
Once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Our guest today is an old dear friend from 40 years of rugby playing in Hawaii and all this. We're both entrepreneurs. He's the executive director of the Advanced Learning Institute. JW has the courage or tenacity to go into the system, and I'd rather stay out of the system. He's also the author of the book, Cracking the Learning Code,
which is also his website, crackingthelearningcode.com.
And we're talking about how education has, especially today, if you're sitting there afraid of losing your job or not earning enough money, or you're not going to get promoted and earn more money, and your kids are, more tech savvy than you, and you're obsolete today, and you don't know if you're going to be able to retire because you did all the right things. You went to school, you got a job, you worked hard, you saved money, you got out of debt, and you invested for the long term in the stock market. And the stock market, as you know, is toppy today as we're talking to you. And toppy means it may crash soon. Mm-hmm. So all of this stuff, you're sitting there and saying, how did I get into this seat, sitting in this cubicle, doing as I'm told, hoping to get a pay raise, and taxes are killing me? The problem from our point of view today is that it starts in school. They train you to sit in that cubicle. Any comments on that, JW?
So what happens is your brain is shaped by the environment you're in. If all of a sudden I took an airplane and I parachuted you into Iraq and you had to survive, you would behave very differently now.
I would definitely put on a turban and grow a beard or do something like that.
Exactly. And so really the environment dictates your behavior. And it dictates your behavior because the environment is a stimulus that puts pressure on neurological tissue and literally reshapes it. And when you've spent 18 years in an environment to 24 years, depending on how long you went to school, that literally shapes your brain, that the only way you can get ahead is to please the person in front of the room. It really kills who you are. Mm-hmm. You run around looking for extrinsic motivation. You run around trying to get joy from other people and other things.
Approval.
Not from inside.
Not from what you can create in the world, what you can add to the world. Look, you know where money comes from? It comes from frigging adding value to the world. Money's a byproduct. It's not what you go after.
No, it's called quantitative easing. You print it.
That's true.
So let me ask you, Jada. So you said in the school system you start like 95% creativity, and after 18 years in the school system you're down to like 5% creativity.
Right.
What do I do to boost my Can I increase my creativity today?
Yes, you can.
How do I do that?
Well, first of all, what you need to do is take some time and figure out what's most meaningful to you in your life. If your children are meaningful to you, if your hobby is meaningful to you, you need to ask yourself why. What do I want more of? When you hit on here's what happens. We bred out a lot of our ability to find what's meaning. That's why we drink too much. That's why we go to sports. We can't figure out what's meaningful to us. We got to get we got to jack up our dopamine and endorphins by doing crazy stuff for our hobbies. We don't do it by doing the meaningful things that can make us money.
So that might not be. You might say, "What's meaningful to me today?" You may not know. So it could be a process that you keep working on.
There's no transformation in nature without a process. Seeds to flowers. Coal to diamonds, caterpillars to butterflies.
Once again, we're talking to J.W. Wilson, Executive Director of the Advanced Learning Institute. His book is he's the author of Cracking the Learning Code. His website is crackingthelearningcode.com. And we're talking about why you're stuck in a dead-end job, or why you're afraid of being fired, or why do you work at something you don't like doing anymore, or why do you just feel stressed all the time? I remember when I worked for Xerox. I'd go and sell my butt off, and I'd make my budget, and all the boss said, or the manager said, was, "What you going to do for me next month?"
That's right. Then they'd raise the budget.
Yeah, they cut your territory, raise your budget. That's the way the game is played. So anyway, for those of you who are trapped inside that world, just understand that some of that may have started in the school system. And worst of all, you're doing it to your kids, and the school system is doing it to your kids. Our education system is busted, broke, and behind the times. It's costing more and more money to send a kid to school. A kid comes out of school deeply in debt. It is the number one asset for the U.S. federal government. It's called student loans. And most of the kids are defaulting. You default on a student loan, you're screwed for life. So it's a mess. And so our guest today is J.W. Wilson, a dear friend for 40, 50 years now. We played rugby together in Hawaii, became entrepreneurs, and we both went into education, although we didn't go to school to become educators. And we're talking about what you can do if you're trapped in that cubicle and you went to school and you hate what you're doing, but you can't quit because of health insurance and you need to make the money. then the school system got you. And again, JW has been a friend of mine for 40-something years, but he was in advertising, like Kim was in advertising. And suddenly we both re-emerge as educators. I am the head of the Rich Dad Company, and JW Wilson is executive director of the Advanced Learning Institute. So he focuses on how corporations can train their companies into being learning organizations. And Rich Dad primarily speaks to entrepreneurs, people who just want to get out of the corporate world. Any comments, Kim?
Yeah, JW, I want to start with you talk about school and how the school system suppresses your genius. It suppresses your passion, and kids come out of school not knowing what they want, and adults are like not knowing what they want anymore.
Yes.
So you're saying that the number one key is to find out what's meaningful to you, what's
Yes.
meaningful to your kids.
Yes.
How do you find that out?
It's not as easy as you think it is. Because remember, you've got this gift, this overabundance of neurons that I talked about in one of the earlier segments, that basically when they're activated, when you're doing what's meaningful to you, your dopamine increases, your serotonin increases, your norepinephrine increases. These are the neurotransmitters of joy and happiness and excitement and discovery. So now this part of your brain has been really literally atrophied by going through a system that never activated it. So you literally have to go through a process, kind of a seed to flower process, a caterpillar to butterfly
And
process.
how do you start? Where do you start?
You have to start first with awareness. And the people that are listening to this show, if they can ask themselves, am I aware of what's meaningful to me? And if they can start writing it down over the next 3 or 4 days, just get a piece of paper or even a week or a month and keep writing down the things that are really meaningful to you and keep pulling an onion by peeling an onion. Why is money meaningful? Just to give you a quick idea, I dealt with a guy the other day. I deal with a lot of alcoholics and drug addicts. I dealt with a fella called me up. He said, JW, I got drunk for 2 weeks. I got lost in my job. I don't know where I was. I don't know if I was there. I'm afraid to get fired when I go in. Well, he goes in. It was a disaster, to tell the truth. But he came back, and I said, what is important to you? He said, retirement. I said, dude, you're 38 years old. You got a while to go. Then he goes, I go, what else is important? He goes, going to Mexico and sitting on the beach. Well, it literally took me 3 days until I said, why are you sitting on the beach? He says, I want to be at peace. I said, Bobby, do you know you can be at peace right now? He quit his job. He stole all the friggin' people that work for him, all the clients from the other job. He started his own company, and he started his own company with a message to create peace within his own organization and for his clients so they wouldn't have to work. So he found out what was meaningful to him. He figured out how to quit his job. He figured out how to start his own business and make a ton of money. It was all based on me. Now, it wasn't overnight.
And then for me, the way I found meaning was I didn't realize that hating school was really a good thing. You know, I hated school so much, and then when
We got in trouble if you hated school.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I was considered, Antichrist or something. But anyway, you couldn't criticize. You have to have a good education. That dogma.
Right.
So I
Well, they're right. You do have to good education.
Yeah, but not the stuff in school.
Right.
And that's all I'm saying. There's a difference between going to school and learning. And I had to find out what I wanted to learn. And that was my rich dad really helped me out. My poor dad when I came back from Vietnam in '73, my poor dad wanted me to get my MBA and possibly my PhD. And my rich dad said, just go to real estate school. And so I did both. I went to real estate school and I went to get my MBA. And halfway through my MBA, I dropped out. I said, this is not where I hated it. My stomach would turn every night. I was afraid I was going to fail. I wasn't going to get the grade. I didn't like the teacher because the teacher was full of it. Man, this guy had never stepped out of kindergarten. He was in school all his life. He had no real world experience.
Right.
Then I go to real estate school, and this guy, I don't know, I wish I remember his name, but this guy was cool. He was rich. He was a teacher. He had done it, and he just talked about what he had done.
And I bet you he helped you discover more of what was meaningful in you.
Yeah. Then I found that I liked learning, and the more I liked learning, the more I studied, the more classes I went to, but I didn't go back to school, if that makes sense to people.
Well, that's funny because when I graduated college, I never wanted to go back in the classroom ever, ever, ever. And the first gift, Robert, you ever gave me was a workshop called the accounting game.
Right.
And you used to teach it, JW.
Right. I ended up running the company for a while.
Yep. Yeah. So that class, it was very hands-on. It was a game. It was experiential. That's where I discovered
Learning
I
was
love
fun.
to learn. I love to learn.
And there was no grade after it, was there?
No, there was no grade.
No.
It was fun. It was exciting. It turned on that.
You could teach a semester of college accounting in 8 hours.
Yeah. But it reignited that spark of my love of learning, and school knocked it totally out of me.
That's exactly right.
So that was meaningful to me. Was I loved learning. You know, like I loved learning how to surf. Surfing's a very terrifying sport, especially in the wintertime, you know.
Right.
But I love the challenge. I love that. And so the question to all of you, listening to you, what do you love? What are you excited about learning? Most importantly, what do you want to be the best at? You know, there came a time when surfing, I realized I was over my head, literally over my head. You know, I couldn't surf Sunset. It was just too big.
Right.
And my friend died. And so I said, I don't want to be the best at this. You know, he saw my golf game. I don't want to be the best at that. So the real question is, what do you want to be the best at? What do you want more challenges of?
And this to go under this to your question, Kim, and to what you just brought up, Robert. So what happens is once you can discover what's meaningful, the second thing you have to come up with is, are you aware that the way you're living your life right now will never give you what's meaningful to you? Without that pearl of awareness that you got to get off this treadmill, if you're not aware that what you're doing is not going to get you what's meaningful, you'll stay trapped. And once you have that, then there's two other things that can really accelerate the process. And this is from a neurological and biological standpoint, is ritual. I studied people that had done anything great in the world from starting back in Aristotle and Plato's time. And I could find no one that didn't have a ritual.
Give me an example of a ritual.
So you take Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes. It could even be a bad ritual. He took cocaine before he wrote. Hemingway would drink a fifth after he finished writing. You can have bad rituals, but you have rituals. Ritualize is like when you go to church. Believe it or not, rituals lower your stress hormones. Rituals also let your biology know you're serious about a commitment. And then your body relaxes into the commitment.
And one of the rituals that Kim and I have is that, you know, I'm a shopaholic. I love nice things, you know. And
I've seen all your cars.
Yeah. So all it said to Kim is, I want a new Ferrari. She says, okay, the ritual is I have to create an asset that pays for the car.
There you go.
And what happens is once the car is paid off, I still have the asset. Now, what most people do is they buy that Ferrari and they get deeper into debt.
That's right.
So my ritual is I buy assets first, and then the assets pay for my liabilities like my car. And what poor people do is they buy liabilities they call assets.
That's right.
And they go broke.
That's right.
And it's really quite that simple. But our ritual, right, Kim, is that I can have anything I want. She can have anything she wants. And what I really hate about, I despise, I go to some of those so-called middle-class neighborhoods in Hawaii. They're very, they're probably making $300,000 a year. They're doctors and lawyers. And they're all going, well, you got to save money. You got to be poor. You got to go to the best schools and all that. To me, if you like that stuff, do it. But I hated it. And I think that's really the first choice you have got to make is what in the world is meaningful to you? What makes you happy? Let me tell you something. 2 Ferraris make me happy. Not an effing Toyota. You know what I mean? I don't get, I love Toyotas. I have a couple for trucks and all this stuff. But when I'm happiest, I'm driving my red and yellow Ferrari.
There you go.
But the ritual is I have to first be a good investor before I can have the Ferrari.
Right.
So once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. We're talking to my great friend, J.W. Wilson. He's the Executive Director of the Advanced Learning Institute. So, Kim, anything else? Because your problem started in kindergarten, didn't it?
It did, actually. Well, nursery school and then kindergarten, it got worse. In kindergarten, I realized that in kindergarten, they were forcing me to do stuff I didn't want to do. They were forcing me to study things or play with things or eat things I didn't want to do. I kept getting kicked out of kindergarten. And then in first grade I started being a little bit mean because I was revolting.
That would be right.
I was revolting. I didn't like this. I didn't like the environment. I didn't want to be there.
You're not mean, but your biology acted up. Your stress hormones go up, and you act out of character. That's what road rage is.
That's what going postal means?
It does. And what happens, matter of fact, it shifts the blood flow out of your most evolved part of your brain to your least evolved part of the brain, where you can be a bee, you-know-what.
Yeah.
You can act mean and nasty.
And some people who are bosses and managers, they're mean.
And
Well,
that's
they're in the
because
same
they're under
situation.
stress too.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can't be compassionate and empathetic.
So I going back to, so we don't get stuck in that, and is the process. The process is to find out what's meaningful. Unpeel the onion. Take your time finding out what's meaningful.
Come up with a ritual like meditation or whatever gets you in touch with your true self. Meditation really makes your brain more plastic, more malleable, more changeable, more learnable.
It takes us into silence where change is made.
Exactly.
So meditation actually changes your brain.
Yes, and so part of your rituals, you need to ritual would be I'm going to do this every day for learning. I'm going to do this every day to make my biology more malleable, more shapeable. I'm going to do this to lower my stress hormones. So have a ritual, and then the second thing I was talking about is find a mentor. That's what Rich Dad is. Rich Dad is so wonderful because you mentor all these millions of people around the world.
Well, there's a higher thought than all that. The way you find your genius is you better figure out what you want to give. You see, the reason most people are poor is they're greedy little bastards. They're just, no, think about it. I want my job. How much money am I making? How much are you making?
Right.
I want my house. I want the new car and all that. We're taught to be greedy, like a bunch of apes fighting for bananas.
Right.
If you want to find your genius, grow bananas so you can feed all the apes out there.
That's right.
And I think the problem is, when I hated school, was only one kid who got an A, and one guy was going to get an F. And ultimately, that was me at the end of it.
They're great on the curve.
Yeah, I didn't like that idea.
You have to have losers.
So all I focus on today is I give what my rich dad gave me, which is called financial education.
And that was your mentor. Your rich dad was your mentor.
That's
But I give, and then I receive. You went to Sunday school. Give, and you shall receive.
And here's a fascinating thing I found. When people find what's meaningful to them, they naturally start to become more generous.
Yeah.
It's hard to be generous when you're in fear.
But not in I tell you, the corporate world I worked in with Xerox, it was not generosity. It was you keep your job.
Exactly right.
You know,
and you
it's-
protect your territory.
every
You don't
man-
share information.
every
you don't
sales-
help anybody
It
else.
goes all back
Every
to that
sells it for
fear,
themselves
protect
and
myself,
all that
protect
stuff.
my family. Yeah.
So J.W. Wilson is great to stay behind. J.W. is executive director of the Advanced Learning Institute. Is author of the book coming out called Cracking the Learning Code. His website is crackingthelearningcode.com. So you can submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com. First question, Melissa.
Our first question today comes from Kendall in Austin, Texas. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The question is, are people hardwired for success from birth, or can being successful be learned later in life?
I think the answer is both, but really what JW is saying, that all of us have a genius, but in school they're only looking for one type of genius, and that's called neurolinguistic, or can you read and write? If you can read and write and do math, you're considered a genius. Right. But if you don't fit in that narrow bandwidth of what they consider genius, you're not a genius. But of course, if you play football and you can heave the football 75 yards, you're considered a genius there too.
Exactly. And
So
may make more money.
Yeah, and so there's different types of geniuses, and the problem is our academic system is only looking for one type. Comments on that, JW?
Yeah, because when you're a child, you have 15,000 connections per neuron. Learning's incredibly easy. If you hear a language before you're 2 years old and you hear it until you're 7, you can be fluent in that language because the neurons are sitting there just waiting. You've got like 200% more neurons than we do as adults. We have 5,000 connections per neuron. But as an adult, that doesn't mean that those connections aren't fluid. They can't keep moving. They can't keep changing. They can't keep shifting. So, and the fascinating thing is the higher the meaning, the higher the change in your brain.
But also what happens, the brain is like the body also. As you get older, it gets stiffer. And so a lot of times it's harder to change or learn new things the older you get. So those are all challenges that are physiological, not
So
mental.
JW is the key to learning to be successful in finding what's meaning.
For us, in our research, that drives everything
That drives
else.
success.
It's like you can't really ride a horse effectively or drive a car without the right bridle. Or you can't drive a car without a steering wheel.
Yeah.
And what we're doing to people, people's biology in the world is we're telling them to go out and be successful, and we're not giving them the steering wheel.
And we read a book called The Happiness Advantage.
Yes.
And the Happiness Advantage, you're saying you got to find what's meaningful. You find what's meaningful, that leads to happiness. And in happiness advantage, they say it's their happiness from inside that leads to success. So it's kind of the same.
We just
same thing.
we just finished a research project at the Institute where we found that we don't really have an addiction problem. We have a meaning problem. What happens is when people's meaning is low in their life, they go to drugs and alcohol to increase the same neurotransmitters that meaning increases. So what happens is what we're working with a couple of treatment programs with is adding a component where people can discover what's meaningful to them so they can increase dopamine and serotonin that was increased by the alcohol and the drugs.
Thank you. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from JP in Omaha, Nebraska. His question is this. Robert, I hear you use the word complicit a lot in your radio shows. Can you please explain what you mean by this?
Yeah, complicit's a very important word. It's because we're taught to do as we're told and follow orders. And as a former Marine, that's what we're taught to do. We do not question the order. And we just did a 3-day workshop with my roommate from the Marine Corps. He's a 3-star general now. And there was a big hubbub because when I crashed into the ocean with my helicopter, one of the roommates of the general, myself and I, he came up, dropped a horse collar, yanked 5 of us out of the water, and he was given an order, leave them. He left us in the water. I'm looking up at him. I can still see his smiling face saying, I can't do anything. I've got to leave you in the water. I pulled out my gun. I was going to shoot him. But he was a good Marine because he followed orders. And to this day, I think his little cycle, I have no animosity toward him. As a Marine, I understand he had to follow orders. But he broke the code. The code is never leave a fellow Marine behind. He left 5 of us in the water. So anyway, and there was another research subject with a Millman project or something where people would come in and he would electrocute. This guy would just do his own. He electrocute.
If they got the question wrong.
Yeah. And that's what they're doing in school. They just negatively program you. There was just a movie about it recently. It's a very good movie. You should watch it. And that's what's going on in our school system. People are complicit. School teachers say, well, we can't change the system, but you're complicit. That's why New York State Teacher of the Year and United States Teacher of the Year by Ronald Reagan was a man named John Taylor Gatto, one of the greatest teachers we've ever had. And I believe in the 90s, he resigned from the New York school system saying, I refuse to damage children anymore.
That's right.
He refused to be complicit. That's right. And so if you're sitting at home right now, sitting in your office going, why am I stuck at a job? I'm afraid to speak out. Why am I being told how much I can make? When do I take time off? When can I go to lunch? That's called complicit. And the school teachers of our system are complicit because most of them know the system is broken, but they don't want to lose their job, their tenure, or their retirement. That's complicit. And that's why I'm not saying break the rules. You better start thinking. Right, J-Dub?
Well, it's the same thing in medicine. We work with a lot of hospitals and medical people. And what happens is all the doctors know this thing sucks. It doesn't work. People aren't, doctor can spend 7 minutes at the most with somebody if they can. It's all about the insurance. It's all about the bottom line. It's all about not getting sued. It's not about healing people anymore.
No.
It's about keeping this behemoth going. They know it, and they're complicit because if they stick their head up too high, they're liable to
lose a license.
They lose their license and they're $300,000 a year.
Yeah, we got a friend who's a doctor, a medical doctor in New York, and he says, I go home every night with a heavy heart because I cannot treat my patients the way they should be treated because of insurance companies. He's going to leave the practice pretty soon.
I feel such pain when I deal with a lot of these medical institutions. Yeah. The nurses want to do so much more. The doctors want to do so much more. But the system, just like the educational system, is crushing the creativity and the joy. And for medicine, the healing out of the system.
And there is killing your courage to speak out and say, this is not correct.
That's right.
That's the problem.
That's right.
And that's why, JW doesn't blame the teachers, but I blame a teacher who knows that they're actually damaging kids. The guy's name is John Taylor Gatto, Gatto. Look up his work. He is so anti-school system, and he was the Teacher of the Year under Reagan. So the revolt is on, except our school teachers are still teaching kids to just to comply, do as you're told. Right. And that's why we're kind of screwed up today because people are just doing as they're told. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Jacob in Gainesville, Florida. Favorite book, Midas Touch. I'm in the second year of running my business. I have to do everything. I've taken no vacation and am pouring everything back into my business. I love what I do, but everyone is telling me I need to slow down, that I'm too stressed. Isn't stress just part of the job? I've read stress affects the brain. Is that really true?
I just got to say, I think it's funny. He's doing what he loves to do, but everybody else is telling him he's working too hard. Everybody's telling him, no, slow down, slow down.
Yeah, there was a study done by a man named Dr. Ilya Prigogine. He won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for it. And Prigogine found out that stress is the way intelligence grows. He called it the theory of dissipative structures, so that if you had a brain, you keep stressing, it goes pop. And all of a sudden, you're smarter. It's the same as learning to ride a bicycle. You fall off. And one day, pop, you know how to ride a bicycle forever. But what the school system does is when you fall off the bicycle the first time, they punish you. And they punish you.
You failed.
You failed. And you never learn to ride a bicycle. The other point of view is this, exactly as Kim says. Most people have been taught that stress is bad. With stress, there's different types of stress.
Stress is good stress.
Yeah.
The other kind of stress
Stress to learn.
Distress is bad.
Yeah, he's learning through his stress. But the other part of it, I was just in the gym this morning, and with JW, and this guy's been in the gym for 20 years. I come running in, I'm pumping around, and I'm out of the gym. And the gym guy looks at me and says, "Hey, man, cool down." I said, if I had your attitude, I'd be with you in this gym.
Cleaning up the towels.
Yeah, cleaning towels, probably making $180,000 a year. I don't know what this guys make anymore. Right. And he's telling me to stress out. No, don't get so stressful. I'm going, look, I'm having a great time. I'm doing what I love, and I'm not smelling dirty towels.
Right.
But he's just doing, and thank God he's there because I need those towels. But anyway, it's just a point of view out there.
Yeah, and I think it also comes back to be careful who you listen to, because so often I see somebody who's living their dream, or they're starting their business, they're excited, they're doing what they love, and it scares the people around them because it threatens them because they're not. Right. They're not doing what they love, so they're going to give you advice, going, "Oh, come back, be like us. Don't step out there, be like us."
But there is something to be said for longevity. Too much stress, the wrong kind of stress. If he's perceiving this as distress to him, it's not really what other people think. It's what he feels himself.
Yeah, if you're doing a job you hate, you're doing it because you're terrified.
If he feels distress, then he should start looking at meditation, exercise, the right foods. You really need that balance, or this business that he's building could blow up because he blows up. Right. So there's got to be a balance in this process.
Good point. Anyway, I was just talking to this woman the other day, and she just retired. I said, "Why did you retire?" She said, "Oh, my job was so stressful." But the only reason she took the job was because she wanted the government retirement plan.
That's right.
So she worked in the state prison system, and she was a hostage negotiator. So if somebody was taken hostage, her job was to defuse the stress. And she said, "I can't take it anymore." I said, "Well, how long were you there?" 10 years. I said, "How many hostages were taken?" 1. I couldn't take it. So I got my retirement and I'm out.
Listen, if that was me, I'd go take a hostage so something would happen.
Okay. So once again, there's no real answers. I think you got to listen to yourself. Be careful of complicity.
Be aware.
I need my job. I need my tenure. And I don't care if I'm killing these kids. And all my kids are learning. Everybody else is in bad schools, and my kids are in good schools. That's just denial.